Hey, everybody. Mark and I have over 20 years of experience as therapists and as addicts in long-term successful recovery. We know better than anyone what works and what doesn't to break out of porn and sex addiction, heal betrayal trauma, and reclaim your relationship.
And we've poured all of our personal and professional recovery and healing experience into a first-of-its-kind program for addicts, spouses, and couples. We call it Dare to Connect.
At least 4 times every week, we engage with you in real time, in the trenches, giving you the knowledge and the tools to take back your life and relationship.
Whatever else you've done on your journey for healing and recovery, you've never done anything like this.
Mark and I, we've made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. Don't reinvent the wheel.
We all know tomorrow never comes. Look, don't wait one more day to change. Claim your free 2-week trial today at daretoconnectnow.com.
Hey, everybody. I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSC Squared podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the PBSC podcast. We are coming at you, Mark and Steve. Mark Castleman and Steve Moore. I guess I should say our last name there. Keep it a little bit official. We're looking at episode 196 today. We are 4 away from the big
200.
That is crazy. It's been a wild ride, but we appreciate you all being here for it. We got a good topic today, and we had an interesting submission from somebody who brings up a couple of points. And one is just a quick question about our Dare to Connect program, and we do get those on occasion. Just wanted to answer that because I thought that the answer would be valid for all of you. We'll keep that short, of course. And then the other one has to do all about what just happens to be our topic this month in the Dare to Connect program. The title, as you can see, my spouse, quote unquote, fooled me and everyone in our family for years. Now I can't stand to even look at him. Is there any hope for us? It's fairly brief, so I'll read this, albeit quickly. Hi, and thank you both so much for what you do. I found you through the worst time in my life by the grace of God. It's very kind words. We appreciate that. I am in my second marriage with a man who is 10 years younger than myself. I poured my heart and soul into this marriage, and I have recently found out all the secrets he has kept from me for years. She doesn't specify how that happened, but they had some sort of a disclosure somehow. He has fooled everyone, my entire family, even my daughters from my first marriage, to the point where they said, "What? Not so-and-so." He seems as though he wants to work through his issues and has taken steps to make changes to make our marriage better. But I can't seem to get through this pain, devastation, and hate that I feel all day, every day. I introduced him to your podcast, and he reached out to Steve, to us, about counseling and is willing to commit to the whole process. But I desperately need help getting through this pain. I pray every day, I go to church, and I try to live like God wants me to, but I have so much hate I can't seem to get past it. I've looked for help groups here where I live, but there really isn't much here for the spouses. You both speak to my heart, and I feel like you could help me. Would the Dare to Connect program be something you would recommend for me, or do we both need to commit to the program? I know he would like to join me, but I am in such a dark place I can't stand to even look at him. Would this help us to find peace again together or alone? I am desperately seeking your guidance and hope you are able to give me the peace that I so need. And then she closes up with her name. We really, man, as always, I know you've all heard us say this many times, but our hearts just ache when we get submissions like this. I mean, it is our passion. Mark and I love doing what we do, both in our practices and with D2C and with the podcast that you're all tuning into. I said this just the other day to a client. Every time I hear from a spouse like this, it's like I can almost hear this being read off in my wife's voice. And I know Mark says things similar too.
Oh, yeah.
It's just so hard. And there is so much, sexual compulsion, sexual addiction, and the impact that it has on families and on marriages is really difficult to quantify. I mean, it's devastating enough for the addict, the guy struggling, but then it reaches out and touches everybody. And so our hearts just really go out to both members of this coupleship and to this woman in particular. We're so sorry that you are struggling with this. We're going to dedicate the episode to answering your quick question about D2C, but also we want to hopefully get you guys on a starting path with some of the stuff that we've been focusing on in Dare to Connect of late, because this topic just happens to, or this question just happens to line up perfectly with what we're doing this month in Dare to Connect. So, in the, I can start with the real quick answer to D2C, and I know Mark's got some good wisdom to add on the topic, but with regard to your question about would the Dare to Connect program for couples, would it work for us even though we're not in a place to speak? And the answer to that is absolutely a resounding yes. One of the reasons why we love the Dare to Connect program and we created it the way that it was is that it can kind of meet anybody wherever they're at in recovery. We have people in the Dare to Connect program where the guy has been sober for several years, and it's a cost-effective maintenance to alternative to therapy for them, where they get kind of a mix of their support groups that are found there, their community is there, they get feedback from not just the people in the group, but from two leading therapists who talk about this stuff, multiple times a week. It's a great way to tag team with recovery. We also, the Dare to Connect program is for people brand new into the process, some of whom even have individual or couples therapists on board, and is a great supplement and support to those things as well, and anything in between. We do have spouses who listen to this program, sometimes in separation, for example, independently from another, where one's actually living apart from the other. And they're both working on the same stuff, but they may not be in a place where they can do that together right now for whatever reason. And then at some point when they're able to come together, because they've been studying the same material and been using the same groups, because each week, there's an addict, a spouse, and a couple group, because they've been studying the same topics from those various perspectives, they're well equipped when they're ready to come together, be it through therapy or through other means, to bring all that together. So there's nothing out there quite like Dare to Connect. Again, we want to keep that brief. And Mark, if you've got anything to add to that, but we did want to definitely answer that. Absolutely. We would encourage anybody to grab the 2-week free trial at daretoconnectnow.com, give it a shot and see what it's about, and see if it is right for you guys. So that's all.
I would just say don't wait just because things are, terribly painful and disconnected and just doesn't seem like you could do anything at this point in time. Get into D2C and start doing something.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
for sure. Yep. It's kind of there to meet you wherever you're at. But with regard to jumping into the topic, so this month's topic, just coincidentally, we have a monthly topic in addition to doing a lot of free range question Q&A work all throughout the month for people based on wherever they're at, in their own individual recoveries. But the monthly topic this month is all things betrayal trauma. So we are kind of deep diving into every facet of that for the spouse. What does the psychology look like? What's the neuroscience behind it? How is trauma stored in the brain? Symptomology and the recovery healing process for that. But then on the addict side, we're delving into, how do we support a partner in this, in their healing journey? What things do we need to be doing in our own recovery that we can do to meet our own authentic needs, while at the same time providing a fertile ground where they can find healing too, and the marriage can grow back together. So we are just a lot of that is also encompassing a lot of topics like shame resilience, different things that we're covering as a part of that. So this is right where our headspace is. So the question was actually really, really, really well timed.
Yeah, and as I read this, there was a story many years ago when I was first starting into my career in counseling. It was actually a really close friend of our family, a gal that my wife grew up with. And her husband, unbeknownst to her, for quite a few years of their marriage, he was a severe sex and porn addict. But he was, like so many of us addicts, he was a master at stealth, keeping it secret, gaslighting, turning the tables on her. And he was so good at it that he literally had every person in his family and hers was against her. They were convinced that she was crazy, that she was the problem, that this was just her stuff. And in fact, he was so good at it that he took her to court and he ended up taking her kids from her. That's how stealthy and crazy. I mean, I call it's like criminal genius, quite frankly. And it's one of the worst situations I've ever seen. I actually put it in the first book that I wrote. But I'm glad to see with this particular situation that even though he's played the stealth role, and we don't know anything about him from her submission, but I'd have to assume that he was so good at secrecy because he was so scared of being found out, and that his reputation, his life, everything would be over if anyone learned. But now that it's come out, it sounds like he's owning it, and has, in fact, reached out to us to try to get into full therapy. And so I'm really glad to hear that he's not going to continue the ruse, right? To continue the whole stealthy secret thing to the complete destruction of everyone around him. So that was good.
No, absolutely. That is a real positive element, and we love the realness of the submission too, right? The recognition that, you know what, I don't know if we can do recovery together right now,
Yeah.
right? I have so much anger for him and for what's going on. I'm so thick in that stage of the betrayal trauma that I don't think I can really relate to him. I don't think I could do direct couples work. And you know what? Believe it or not, that's actually great, because oftentimes when we begin this journey with clients, sometimes the natural response is people will come in. I mean, I know I did this in my healing journey for what's worth when my wife and I got into therapy. Well, clearly we're having problems as a coupleship, so we therefore need couples therapy. And a lot of the time that actually is contraindicated and not the right way to go at the beginning.
And it often
And so,
can make things worse.
sure.
And in fact, I've seen so many situations where couples therapy was premature, where the gaslighting actually continues from the addict.
Mm,
And therapists don't have a crystal ball in their desk drawer.
totally.
We as therapists can be gaslighted and bamboozled sometimes as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, you see that. So
No, for sure. So there's lots to cover here, and we know there's a lot to do. What we wanted to do today was to share a little bit of what we covered in the addicts. Our addict sessions are on Mondays, our partner sessions are on Wednesdays, and our couple sessions are on Fridays in the Dare to Connect program. So what we wanted to do with the day of recording, just being perfect timing, is share a few of the things that we actually shared in the addict session that we just recorded, with regard to betrayal trauma and some of the basics with it. We're going to keep this short. We obviously can't go nearly in depth here as we can there, but we do want to at least make sure that we're on the same page with some of these things.
And we're going to talk about a few of the things we're going to go over with the spouses on Wednesday about betrayal trauma that we are going to put in. So
that's true. I guess it is kind of a sneak peek.
Going to get a little bit of both.
Quick little amalgam here of some of the stuff that we're talking about. So there's a couple of attributes that everyone ought to be aware of. If for some of you this may be new, some of this may be old information, but a couple of pieces of symptomology when it comes to betrayal trauma and what it looks like. And probably the first thing that we would throw on the list that not everyone may necessarily be aware of is that there is, when you're talking about betrayal trauma on the order of it being perpetuated by a spouse, there is, depending on where betrayal trauma seats from, there is in many ways that helps to determine, I guess you could say, the significance and the impact of what it causes a person to question when it comes to other areas of their reality. And what I mean by that is, it's very common for Mark and I, when we have a client come in for a spouse, not to just question the marriage. And that would be obvious, right? For most people, it would make a lot of sense. Oh my gosh, I've been married to this guy for however long, and I thought things were one way, and here they are another. And he's how could he do this to me? Where did this come from? It's out of the blue. How am I ever going to trust him again? Right? That is definitely a huge central focus of betrayal trauma. But I think that's what most people would kind of think of when they first envision it. What a lot of people don't realize, and sometimes spouses don't realize, is that it is very normal not just to question the marriage, but to begin to question everything. And that sounds a little strange to some, but let's explain real quick. I was working with a spouse one day, and this is a conversation I've had many times, but she probably put it best. This is just in the early years of this is one of the first spouses I think I worked with in a couple dynamic. And she looked at me and said something almost to the exact point of, if he could pull the wool over my eyes, who can't?
Yes.
Right. If I live with this man, I have sex with this man. I have made children with this man. I have built a marriage with this man, and I didn't pick up on any of this. And if he could do that day in and day out and me not know, what else is wrong? And how would I even know? How would I even be able to tell? Right. And what she described is very real. Today in the addict session on D2C, I used kind of what I called it, what I call kind of the Truman Show phenomenon, if you've ever seen that movie, right? Where the lead actor, Jim Carrey, he's living in this alternate reality that is actually synthetic and not real. And as the movie goes along, he starts to pick up gradually over time on how something's just off with his life, right? And he comes to find out in his case that the whole thing really is genuinely fake, right? Now, the reality is for spouses that we work with, that's not the case. But that trauma, because of the level of magnitude of I guess you could say the ground zero event, spouses don't just have a hard time in the marriage, they have a hard time even grappling with what is my actual reality now in general.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and I remember that happened as my wife and I got into really solid recovery and healing. She started to speak her truth and tell me what had gone on over the decades. She said, I started to doubt everything about myself. Who is this guy? Do I not have any ability to have discernment or intuition or a gut feeling? She started to question everything she would feel. Am I really feeling that this is something to look at? Am I really being religiously, you could say, inspired? She was just a wreck, not knowing what to believe or trust about her own thoughts, her own feelings, her own insights. Right? This is sometimes we call this crazy making.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's a really aptly well named term, right? I remember when I heard that term as a kind of a 12-step reference, and I remember when I heard that as an addict in recovery, I was like, geez, that's a little bit harsh. You want to take a little bit off the top of that?
Yeah, right.
Like crazy making. But when you think about it and you start to understand it from this perspective, it really is true.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of spouses will describe they feel genuinely insane. They don't know what to trust. Their gut, quote unquote, that they'll oftentimes refer to. They feel like it's broken.
Yes.
They don't know what to think. Right? They find themselves being overprotective in situations where it's not necessary. They find themselves wondering if they can be safe in situations where they legitimately are. Right? It's just a whole world that is very, very difficult to navigate.
Yeah, and as we, so the whole loss of trust that you just said, not just trust for your spouse or partner, but trust for yourself, trust for other people in general, trust for systems, trust for, religious settings, trust for, the list goes on and on and on. Trust just flies out the window.
Absolutely.
Because a brain that is now in fight, flight, freeze and an absolute complete hunker down survival mode, that is a brain that is not tapped into trust. In fact, it's the last place it wants to go.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the big casualties of all of this is that trust component. And then we talk about this whole concept of guilt and shame. Mm-hmm. That's usually something reserved specifically for the addict. Well, you know what? He was finally caught after all these years or decades of stealthiness and secrecy and lying to my face and all my family and our friends. He's having, guilt and shame because he's been caught. And that's absolutely part of his process, an essential part, by the way. But a lot of times what's overlooked is the guilt and shame that the spouse of the addict feels. They'll say, well, what do you mean? She didn't do anything. Why does she have guilt and shame? Right? And so now we start to look at this. Well, think about it. Why didn't I notice? Why didn't I pick up on this early in our marriage? I should have known who this guy was before I decided to marry him. Right. And so we have partners of addicts who feel horribly guilty and shameful for having been duped, for having not been smarter, more insightful, more on their guard, for having not seen what they needed to see or having, opened their ears to hear. It piles horrible guilt and shame on the partners unjustifiably. It's they didn't do a thing. They didn't cause this. It wasn't their fault. They didn't ask for it. They can't fix it. And yet here comes all this guilt and shame on their shoulders.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that we're talking about that because I know for a lot of the guys that we work with, that can be a little bit blindsiding because they are usually when they do come in, that's one of the first things that they talk about, right? Is just, oh my gosh, I'm just such a horrible person and I'm so this and I'm not enough of this and I'll never be enough. And they're oftentimes they are so consumed by their own guilt and shame, they are really shocked when they're like, oh my gosh, my spouse is working with that same thing. Yeah. From a very different perspective. Absolutely. Right. Sexually and otherwise, like Mark indicated, right? If here I'm in a relationship with this guy where we committed to sexual exclusivity, right? I'm the one that he has sex with. And here he is stepping outside of the marriage. It's very difficult for a lot of spouses not to kind of add that up intellectually as as math and say, well, I must be the deviation in the equation, which is of
Yeah.
course not correct. And the reality is that when you look at the psychology of addiction, it really wouldn't matter in virtually every case who that guy was married to or how much he was having sex with you or not, or whatever the case is, because the nature of addiction has actually very little to do with that dynamic. But oftentimes we as guys in our addicted, distorted state, sadly, have even fronted and doubled down on that insecurity that spouses have vocalized and said, yeah, it is. If we just had more sex, then this wouldn't be a problem. And so, yeah, a lot of deep psychology that spouses really struggle with on that guilt and shame front. The big thing also to keep in mind here, guys, is you really do have to recognize that trauma, when we look at trauma and how it happens in the brain, trauma is unique to each spouse. The global statement that I usually use for this is as I say it as follows: trauma is in the eye of the beholder. Meaning that when I experience something traumatic, or a spouse experiences of an addict experiences something traumatic, my brain makes an assessment and internalizes that experience about whether it's traumatic or not, to what degree, what trauma messages are sent with that, etc. And it bases that on everything from my background to past traumatic events that I've experienced, which determine in many ways whether it's what we call simple versus complex trauma in the clinical world, to pre-existing support systems, to belief sets, to spiritual framework, probably to some degree to the, Del Taco burrito I had for lunch yesterday, and if it's bugging my stomach. All of those things come together in a very kind of almost flashpoint moment as the brain experiences or processes things through the lens of triggers and determines how that speaks to a person. And so what that means is that, among other things, is that one of the biggest mistakes that we can make as an addict, and many of us, we learn this from our crappy culture, right? All that culture that Mark and I talk about all the time about how to navigate relationships that is wrong. The worst thing that we actually said this today in Dare to Connect, the worst thing that you could ever say to a spouse in this process is the following: I know how you feel.
Oh, dear God, don't say that.
Everybody, I swear our culture is like geared towards offering that phrase at some point when we're talking to someone who is struggling. I know how you feel. And it has got to be the most disconnecting statement, like in all of empathy kind.
Or when a lot of guys I work with, when it's very early in our therapy process, I'll hear them say this: I completely understand.
Oh my gosh.
I totally understand.
Wow.
You can just see me. I'm just cringing inside. He did not just say that, did he?
Yeah. If your spouse is already kind of the moon's distance from the earth at that point, they just teleported to Pluto.
Yeah, seriously.
Right. There is nothing more distancing when we try to, from a place of wanting to relate, to say, I know how that feels, or something along those lines. You don't. Nobody knows what another person feels in totality. We might be able to reference with some things, and definitely the emotions for sure behind that, which by the way is a key component to empathy, which we're going to talk about in a minute, is connecting with the emotions and the feelings behind somebody's circumstances or the environment that they find themselves in. But the minute we step in and want to pretend like we're somehow the expert is the minute we've just stepped into a really toxic realm.
Yeah.
And so this kind of is shifting now into a little bit of kind of a nod towards the addicts who may be listening to this. If you are looking to provide safety, one of the first things that you can do with this process is this is a new dimension on this lead into the pain topic that Mark and I, talk about on here a lot, is even though this is scary and it's understandable why we don't want to go here because emotionally it's uncomfortable, but it's to be able to say, this is scary. You can even own it, right? This is scary for me to even say because I feel like I'm kind of walking myself to the firing line a bit, but like, can you help me to get this? Can you maybe compare this to something, or can you try to explain a little bit more about what it is like for you? Because it's important for me to understand. It's important to me to understand this reality and what this looks like for you, so that I can start, shifting to a place of really being able
And
to
it's one of the most feared statements by a porn and sex addict. And when
oh yeah,
when we introduce it to guys, they look at you like, are you lost your ripping mind?
you are
Here's the phrase. What I want you to look, see you. Part of you wants to run, hide, scream, get away. And I want you to actually say these words to your spouse. Would you please tell me more?
Yeah.
What? Right.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. Can you please? I'm very genuinely wanting to understand more.
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
And be authentic with it, right? You can talk about the fear and the fact that there's a hesitation. I mean, if I was to say that authentically, I might even say like the following. I got to tell you, right now, I can't honestly say that I want to know more, but I can authentically say I need to. Right?
Yes.
I need to know more about this because my brain just wants to close off to it. It wants to get defensive. It wants to shut down. It wants to minimize. And I don't want to do that with you.
Or I love and care about you so much. I'm willing to put my fear aside for a minute.
Absolutely.
I can hear you.
Absolutely.
Right. And I just want all the partners listening to know these trauma responses that you've experienced, they have very little to do with what actually happened and much more to do with what the experience was like for you, how
Absolutely.
you internalized it, the meaning that it had, the history that's in it, everything else it was connected to, right? What do we say? This is not about facts. This is about feelings. Mm-hmm. It's very important to understand that. And that kind of, so whatever you're feeling, partners, is legitimate. It's to be honored, heard, opened up to, looked at, validated. Whatever you're feeling is okay. You're okay. Yeah. And we just get it all out on the table so it can be a safe enough environment to express it openly and let it be heard. And I
love that.
I was going to say that brings us into this next space for an addict, which is the place of how do you help her heal? Because she says, I can't stand to be around this guy. I don't want to see his face. Mm-hmm. What is this guy going to do then?
Yeah.
The very first thing we say, this guy's got to get into the place of validation of her feelings. Validation of not whether it's right or wrong, not trying to explain himself, not trying to, split hairs, but just simply looking at her and saying, oh my gosh, this person that I love and care about more than anyone else on the planet is in trouble. And I am going to come to her aid.
Yes. And I have played a role in that. And it's important that I be accountable for that. Right. And that's a whole other discussion. That's a whole other podcast, right? Is the accountability side of this, but being able to validate, it's important, guys, to recognize that does not require consensus. I can authentically validate a person. I can authentically validate my partner and be able to connect with their reality and explore it with them and understand it while not having to adopt that. And that kind of takes us to, as we're wrapping this thing up here today, that kind of takes us next to this bullet point that we talked about quite a bit with the guys today in Dare to Connect, and we'll definitely be talking about more as the month goes on, is there is a real risk for most of the guys that I work with and that Mark works with. One of the biggest barriers to this validation concept and to being able to help a partner heal from betrayal trauma in general is the following. Guys get caught into what I'm calling, this is a Steveism, I guess, is what we're calling unaccountable extremes. Okay. And what those two extremes tend to look like are as follows. The one side is the extreme of shame, which is I'm a piece of crap. I'm useless. I'm worthless. I can't do anything right. The fact that she's hurting is just evidence of that. She would be better off without me. She should move on. The best thing I could do here is to free her from this horrible cage she's in, right? That's what deep shame looks like. Now, and I'll explain why that's problematic. The other side of that is the other extreme, right? Which is going to defensiveness or pride or ego getting in the way. Look, I don't know what your problem is, person, right? But this is not as bad as you think. You're seeing it wrong. You need to see it this way. If you saw it this way, then it'd be fine, right? Both of those places are extremes that prevent one key thing from happening. They prevent honest accountability, because the one is withdrawing and isolating from a place of defensiveness and unwilling to acknowledge or even go there with a person. And the other one is going way beyond. It's like shooting for this island space, but we went 3 island chains over. and we're going way past, I need to be accountable for this. And we go to that place of, I'm so useless, there's nothing that can be done. And the thing that both of those places share in common is that they will not lend to a partner's healing. A partner did not sign up for a guy to say, screw you, this is your problem, it's not mine, right? They signed up for a partner, but they also at the same time, even though some spouses will even say at the opening, sometimes it feels good, like for a second, spouses in the long run also do not want from a partner for them to just prostrate themselves saying, we're not worthy over again. Again, they signed up for a partner, someone to collaborate with, someone to meet them in the middle, someone to connect with, communicate with, share with, grow with, right? And both of those spaces, these unaccountable extremes, limit our ability to be able to hit that magical space, which says, you know what? I appreciate you sharing your reality with me. This is what I'm pulling from that. And if I look at my own authenticity, I can be accountable for X, Y, and Z. And this is what I can do to help. And I am really sorry. And here's me showing up, doing the very best that I can, not to own your stuff, but to do everything I can to rectify that which has been wronged. Right.
The thing is, as we finish up, if you go to either of those extremes, guys, what do? You prevent yourself and your partner from walking through the gateway to healing. And what is that gateway? True empathy.
Yep.
Getting on the same side of the equation, standing shoulder to shoulder. I'll often help couples to picture themselves, when these things fall apart and all the secrets come out. They're not only not together, they're on opposite sides with the Grand Canyon between them. And I'm saying, how do we get shoulder to shoulder? Even if that means to look at that thing over there that you, husband, did to me. Can we stand shoulder and shoulder and look at that? That's entering through the gateway of empathy.
Yeah. That's great. No, very well put. Very well put. Well, guys, we got to let you go. We're coming up again on a half hour. We've been going way past that time lately on this thing, and we don't want to bore you to death. We appreciate you being here. We know it's a lot to take in on a podcast. It's a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of heavy information, but we just want to, again, thank all of you for being here. We appreciate you. We appreciate your patronage and your faith in us. And it's always so good to hear from you guys, whether it's questions that you have for the podcast or whether it's just statements of, hey, this is helping me in this way. Please do keep those coming. Those are just so valuable to us. That's what makes it rewarding for us. We love you. As you guys know, outside of discussing this other program that we have, this podcast probably is pretty unique in that we don't monetize it at all. There are no paid advertisements on here. There's nothing that we shove in your face or anything. We do hope that you'll consider joining us at Dare to Connect. Look again for a free trial on that. DareToConnectNow.com is the place to go for that. But we have no plans to change that. We always want to keep this thing commercial free that way and be able to have this just be a place where you can sit down, find some healing, find some tools, and move a little further along in your recovery journey. So thank you for being here with us to do that. If you do have something you'd like to submit to the podcast, you can send that directly to us at pbsepodcast.com. There's a little contact form down there at the bottom. We'd love to get submissions from you. Those are always the first priority to tackle on here. So we'd love to hear from you. And other than that, we will bid you guys a good week.
That was great. We'll see you next time on PBSE, and we'll see some of you over in D2C.
Indeed. Take care. Everything expressed on the PBSE podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.